Hello everybody, welcome to Red Tool House. On today's video, I want to do something that I haven't done in a while, and that's talk about a specific plant or tree that we find here on our farm in the Appalachian Mountains. And today I want to talk about the American Beech, and is it the ideal shade tree for your homestead or farm? So come check it out. So when I talk about shade benefits on the homestead, I'm not necessarily talking about some place that you can sit under and lay in your hammock and drink your lemonade, although that's nice. What I'm talking about is how we do things here in our woodlot pasture for our pigs, which is silvopasture, where we want this combination of trees and grasses growing in, have this good balance to where the trees can flourish, produce their nutrients, produce shade, and then of course the pasture grasses can grow up and give our pigs something to munch on as they hang out here in the woods. So I've discovered in working with silvopasture, we're actually removing trees instead of planting trees, since we have 100 acres of hardwood forest here. That getting a good balance, you want a nice diverse ecology in your forest, and beech plays a key part in that. But there are some pluses and minuses to the beech tree. So let's talk about the details specifically. So the beech tree we're talking about is Fagus grandifolia, the American beech, not to be confused with the European beech. This is the only native beech this is the only beech that grows native in North America, and you only find this east of the Great Plains. Now it goes as far north as Nova Scotia into that part of Canada, and can actually be found as far south as northern Florida, I believe. But here in West Virginia, they are all over the place. So some key characteristics of the beech are, first and foremost, they are shade tolerant. They actually can thrive well in the shade, makes them grow even slower, but they can also do quite well in partial to full sun. So it makes them very diverse or versatile when it comes to that situation. You can see here, right where this beech tree is, I'm standing in front of, we've got a poplar, got a red oak, and got another red oak on all three sides. So it's completely bracketed by trees, but yet this guy's still growing, and he's probably creeping up to 30, 40 feet. And it's completely in the shade canopy of all the surrounding trees. Same with this, we'll turn here, this beech right here behind me, doing quite well. And probably getting to 40 feet as well, and completely shaded. Beech has a very distinctive bark. It's very smooth. When it comes to comparing it to other hardwood trees, you can see how smooth it is compared to something like an oak or a hickory. Very, very distinguishable in the woods. As I mentioned, they grow very slowly, but the con of growing slowly is they live for a very, very long time and get very, very tall. They can get up to 100 to 130 feet. And I can attest to that specifically, because let's step out here. And if you can kind of see, there's no trees around me right now. That's because of this big turkey right here. That is a monster beech tree. It, at the base, is probably about 40 inches in diameter, and it's growing right in the beginning of a watershed here that comes down behind the farrowing barn. So this big girl has been producing a shade, has been producing mast for decades, if not centuries, as big as she is. And I would assume that she's every bit of 100+ feet tall. So one of the key benefits, the reason I like the beech so much, or one of the reasons I like the beech, I kind of have a love-hate with it, we'll get into that in a second, is the fact that these trees can produce some serious mast in the fall. They produce little tiny beech nuts that are actually wrapped in these little burrs. They almost look like something you see out in a meadow, but they're a condensed small little nut. But man, they pack a punch, and they are a good source of protein and fat. And I love that here in our pig woodlot, because this tree alone produces a ton of protein and a ton of fat for our pigs in the fall. So it drops it all, of course, and they just come through and vacuum it. My plan was to obviously try to show you one, but I can't find one anywhere. They have vacuumed this forest since we are in spring. They've had the winter to vacuum everything up, along with every squirrel, chipmunk, and a deer, whatever runs through here, gets the opportunity to do the same. One quick little side note about this smooth bark is the bark is actually so thin that the beech tree can be susceptible to disease brought by insects and those things. And of course, if you go to any state park in the Northeast, you'll see beech trees with people that have carved their initials in it. Now, this is here on my property that I've been living on for 20 years, and probably the previous owner or even further back carved some initials here. I notice there's an NC and a WV. The WV obviously stands for West Virginia. But it's hard to tell how long ago this was carved, and unlike other trees that would just slowly heal and grow over that to just make a big scar, these stay there forever. So when you go to state parks and you see somebody's initials and it looks like it's fresh, they could have been there forever because the beech tree just can't heal over that. So it does make them a little more susceptible to rot and disease when it comes to any damage to their bark. Another benefit of the beech, I don't know if you can see that monster there right beside my side-by-side. That is a pretty good sized beech as well. Not as big as the one that was behind me here just a second ago, but it's still pretty substantial. But another benefit of those is even though they live forever, they seem to just go on and on. There's documented trees that are 300 plus years old. I believe there's one in Tennessee that has Daniel Boone's carvings on it, and they expect that tree to be 200 years older than Daniel Boone. So there you go. But the fact that they live a long time, even after they cacketh, even after they die, they are still quite a benefit for wildlife, because standing snags of beech for some reason stay around for a long, long time. Now, if they were on the ground, they'd rot pretty quickly. But when they're standing, those snags are very helpful and produce habitat for owls, for squirrels, for birds, raccoons, because they tend to hollow out. So it's a great source of habitat for the wildlife to hang out in. Interestingly enough, the beech, the one downside to the beech when it comes to wildlife is their leaves are not that desirable. Most wildlife will actually pass over them and only check them out if it's the last thing in the woods to nibble on. There's just something about, I guess, the flavor of it that just doesn't... Yeah, there's something about it that's just not appetizing. So that's another reason why the beech does so well. It doesn't get browsed very much by the local wildlife. Now, pigs, on the other hand, they kind of come around and chew off some of the lower branches. You can see, wow, daggone, that left a bitter taste in my mouth. The things I do for you guys on YouTube. So yeah, the wildlife really doesn't browse in the leaves. The pigs are really, I think they're breaking the branches off really to get to the nuts when the fall comes around. So I don't think they're really eating the leaves. I've never seen a pig take out a sapling to chew on the leaves. So I don't think it's appealing to anyone. See if I can do this while I climb this almost vertical hill to get back to my side-by-side. There's an interesting history fact about the beech. In antiquity, the bark of the beech, because it was so thin and pliable and easy to remove from the tree, was actually used as a writing surface prior to paper in Europe. Ooh, here we go. Bit of a climb. In fact, if you look at the etymology of certain words, European words, a lot of European languages have their word for beech is very similar, if not identical, to the word book. There's a fact for you. So when it comes to easily identifiable characteristics of the beech, we talked about the bark already, so that's a pretty good giveaway. Now there's some other trees in the woods, of course, that have smooth bark, but when you come across a beech, you can easily identify it by looking at its leaves, and I look at it from its branch pattern. So let's talk about the leaves first. So the leaf is a single lobe and is a bit serrated. You can see it kind of has little saw teeth edges on it there. So that helps identify, that with the bark and the leaf. And what's interesting enough about the leaves, the trees are easier to identify by the leaves in the wintertime, because beech is one of the few, if the only trees in the eastern Appalachian hardwood forests where in the wintertime the leaves die and turn this goldy bronze color, but they stay on the tree all year long. Not completely, but 60-70% of the leaves still hang on all through the winter. And it's only the new growth in the spring that pushes them off. In fact, as a kid, we'd always talk about how the beech tree was kind of like the ghost tree, because when the wind would come through the woods in the wintertime when you're walking, you'd hear this, this kind of little eerie rattle, and it was always the leaves, the dry leaves kind of clacking together, because they were the only tree in the forest that still had leaves on them. Now, one other characteristic that really sticks out to me and helps me really identify a beech quickly is the length of the branches. So I don't know if you can see right here, there's a branch, tip of the branch, and it's coming from that beech tree all the way back there. So that branch, which is a lower limb branch, is easily 25 feet long. If I'd cut it down and lay it out, I'd say easily 25 feet. So they have these branches that start low on the tree, but they just seem to grow and grow and grow and kind of defy gravity a bit. They don't really weep. It's not like they hang down really low. They just seem to grow out horizontally for quite a few feet. And another perfect example of how I identify beech easily, seems to be on my place, is whenever I'm walking through the woods and I get a limb in my face over my road or over my trail, it's usually always a beech tree. They're full of spider webs too. So these branches, they just seem to stretch out, and they're getting that sunlight. So while they are shade tolerant, they're still trying to get that sunlight so they can just reach out and fill in any gaps in the canopy. And my roads, of course, are those perfect gaps. So for that reason alone, I think that's why they are the perfect shade tree on the homestead, especially when it comes to livestock. Where I'm standing, South Ridge, so we're north facing, our farrowing barns down here, where these multiple beech trees are that are dominating the canopy, the temperature is about 10 to 15 degrees lower than it is if I'd be standing out in the open sunlight. Between the long limbs and the tallness of the tree and the density of the leaves, they really, really block out the sun. Now, the downside of that, of course, is there ain't never going to be any grass growing here as long as I leave all these beech trees. So it has to be this fine dance, this balance of beech tree here, pasture grass here type of thing, because you're not going to have pasture grass growing right up underneath a beech tree, most likely, unless you do some heavy pruning there to open that up. A beech tree, however, can be bad for forest ecology if something gets out of balance there. The beech tree has one advantage that most full-story hardwood trees in the Appalachian forest don't have, and that is when they experience any trauma, they will send up new suckers or new saplings from their roots. So anywhere that they've got roots close to the surface, again, a tree this size, imagine how big that root cluster is, they can shoot up new saplings to be able to kind of pick up where this tree's leaving off. If it thinks it's dying, it's going to send out a whole bunch of kids. So in that situation, you imagine that if you have a situation that pokes a hole in the canopy, and you've got an acorn, you got a hickory nut, you got some of these other things laying there ready to sprout and take off, they may sprout, but that beech already has established roots, and it's going to always win, and most likely will grow up enough to shade out those other hardwoods. So it could really create a situation where you don't have diversity in your forest. So 20 years ago, when we did a select timbering of all 100 acres here on our property, we've seen the fruit of that, the very similar situation where the beech are becoming more prolific in the forest. So what I do is I go through and I'm very selective in who I thin out, but make a key spot to thin out when there's maybe a competing oak or a competing maple or something else that I think, oh, if I cut this beech down, it's going to give a chance for this oak to take off and thrive. So it's one of those things where I'm walking through the woods, maybe with just a hand pruner and pruning down small saplings, or if I find myself in the woods working on something with a chainsaw, then maybe take a wider circle and just do an assessment of beech clusters to see if maybe we're developing a monoculture of one spot of beech that we don't want to have. So when it comes to the wood and the commercial timber value of beech wood, it's really not that high. It's considered a low-grade timber. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Probably the most is the grain is kind of plain. It doesn't have a lot of characteristic to it. It is tough to dry, and it's tough to dry straight commercially. And it's one of those things, all wood is hygroscopic, so it'll absorb water and release water. But it seems like beech, when it absorbs and releases, it has a tendency to move more, whereas some of the cellular structure of like your oaks and your hickories and maples and those things, they kind of become more rigid. So even though they may raise in humidity and expand a little bit, they're not getting the opportunity to get funky. It seems to be more symmetrical. Everything seems to be moving in unison, whereas beech can just get crazy. So like if you made a table with a beech top, there's a chance that as it adjusts to the humidity situations in your house throughout the seasons, that top could end up looking like a potato chip over time. Now it is, however, used quite a bit in engineered products. So imagine the amount of lumber you can get out of a beech, the amount of material. So it comes in handy for plywood, engineered products, these laminate beams, all those type of things, because when you're dealing with small laminations, then you don't have to worry about the expansion and contraction of that as much. Now when it comes to woodworking or furniture making, there is some value, there's marketability there. Specialty woodworkers like wood turners like it. Again, tight grain, it turns really well, it does machine well. But when you look at like commercial level furniture, it's used for filler, spanners, those type of things, nothing that's going to be exposed. I always think of when North Carolina was thriving in the furniture business, they would use a lot of beech for the skeletal structure of couches and those type of things where it's not going to be seen, it's going to be behind the cushions. It's a large swine sneaking up behind me. But interestingly enough, beech is sometimes, for woodworkers, is substituted in place of hard maple, sugar maple, because sugar maple obviously is very expensive and it's very hard, so it's a little bit harder to work with. So there's times that woodworkers will actually substitute where they would use maple, they'll use beech in its place. Now when it comes to like post-processing food or beverages, beech does have a place as well. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of beech, I always think of beechwood aging and Budweiser beer. So Anheuser-Busch, in their fermenting bins, their large bins, it's my understanding they use beechwood that has been treated in a specific way to lay down in those fermenting bins, and it helps the yeast attached to it. There's something goes on there. So that's why you hear beechwood aged, of course. But also when it comes to some traditional smoking of specific cheeses or specific sausages, that beech wood is used to smoke. And because it's so hygroscopic, even after it's dried out, you can really soak up a lot of water and get a lot of good smoke. Beech is actually good for firewood as well. I don't burn it because we have so much oak and ash around here. But it does burn really well. It burns a bright flame and has a lot of BTUs because it is pretty dense. So if you find yourself in a situation where you want to incorporate beech into your silvopasture for your animals, whatever it may be, then I would say definitely keep it in. Now, if you're going to plant beech from start, and if you're 48 like I am, then you're going to be planting it for your kids or your grandkids, because it's not going to do much for you in your lifetime. But if you're in a situation like we are, where you're thinning out forest, then I would consider leaving some beech behind. But just keep an eye on it. Make sure it's not taking over with all those shoots and beating out everything else. Here, I got to turn this way. Even though we're talking about beech, you got to see a pig in his wallow. So I have yet to mill beech. I don't know why I haven't. It's, as much as I've cut down, I really haven't messed with harvesting it, because it seems like I'm always wanting to mill something else, poplar or oak or whatever. But one of these days I may have to cut a beech down, put it on the mill and see how it mills up. But we'll definitely do a video of that if that's the case. All right. Well, I'm sure y'all are looking at her and not looking at me. So we're going to call it quits today. I appreciate everybody watching. Take care.